Hello, this is Matthew Ward. I'm the mid-market CloudForms and Cloud Solutions Architect Specialist. I'm here to talk today and show you a demo of CloudForms. Up on my screen right now, you should be able to see sort of the overall agenda of what we're going to discuss. We're going to touch on some of the key points and key features of CloudForms. I want to keep this interactive, so if you have any questions while we're going throughout, feel free to stop me, and then we can do Q&A at the end. If we might, for some advanced topics, we might kind of push that back to the end of it just to make sure we can hit on all of these different key points. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to make sure that everybody is able to see a CloudForms Management Engine self-service. Make sure that our audio and video are working correctly.
See it here.
All right. So what I'd first like to do, and what I like to do when I'm doing a demo, is I like to go ahead and show you sort of what the user experience looks like. And this is what the experience that not necessarily your administrators are going to be using, but a simplified view that we can expose to different parts and aspects of our customers and our companies. So for example, let's take that we have a marketing person who goes and does a regular marketing campaign to kind of promote the company business. And every 3 months, they run a marketing campaign, and all they really need is just some type of simple service. And within this simple service, they just want to be able to provision something like a WordPress application that they can just go in and put some marketing information into. Nothing too complex, nothing too simple. Well, what we can do is we can create what is called a self-service catalog, and we can give them access to that in their self-service portal. And this way, they don't need to go through, create a ticket with IT, wait for IT to get all the requirements, do all the provisioning, get everything set up. Instead, we've built a lot of that process for them. I'm going to show you what it looks like from the user's point of view. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. Even though I says admin, I'm just logging in as a user. It's kind of associated with any particular user. So when I sign in, this is the first thing I see, which is a dashboard. So it's a simplified view. There's not a lot of options here, but we can see in just one quick view what everything looks like. I have 31 services that I've been provisioned. I have 23 of them that have been approved. I have none that are retiring. If I set up a call center, I can actually see my current chargeback rate. So my month to date, and I can just kind of see some general information. What I'm going to do is go over to our service catalog, and I have a number of services that I'm providing to my customers to be able to provision. Now, a service could be a single VM, it can be an automation action, or it could be a series of VMs and automation actions. So in this WordPress example, it all could be just sort of an all-in-one type VM scenario, or we could break out the database into a separate VM and then the WordPress application on top of that as a second VM. And we can, using CloudForms, I like to outline sort of the environments that we're provisioning these things to. So in this case, it's AWS. In this case here, it's Azure. But we can also hide that away from the users, so they don't necessarily know. And this is all sort of managed by what group a user is assigned to, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So I've clicked into the AWS Gold Master, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to provision a new service. I'm going to call this Marketing App. I'm going to go ahead and throw that right into my production system. I'm going to name this WordPress, an application server, and if I wanted, I could go and put in a key pair. Now, I'm only asking a few small minor questions here. We can expand this out and ask a lot more questions, or we can make it simple as just clicking a checkbox to add it to your cart. So all of this is expandable, and this is really customizable to what your customers' needs are. So for example, if I wanted to allow them to choose which environment to deploy this on, my local VMware environment or maybe AWS, we can allow them to choose that in a box here, or we can just make it part of a different service catalog item, or we could ask them anything you can imagine. So once we fill out our information, we're going to come up to the top right corner here, and we're going to add to our shopping cart. Now, if I wanted to, I could add another service from my service catalogs, and then it will add a second item to my shopping cart. And this is just like your standard, shopping cart type scenario. But I'm going to go ahead and jump into that. And once you have all of your shopping cart items together, you can go ahead and hit order. So I'm going to go ahead and order that service. I'm going to flip over to my service and then my requests. All right, we can see here it's pending approval. So I've already started the process of provisioning this, and we can inject an approval process. So let's say the same marketing manager, maybe they need to have approval from their manager in order to provision the resources for this. Or maybe if they're going into VMware, they don't need permissions, but if they're going out to the cloud, they need permissions because it's going to be a call center. It's on somebody's credit card. And so we can also inject multiple steps in that process. If they provision to their VMware environment, then maybe we want to have the VMware administrators approve that so that we can guarantee that they have the resources available if you want to gain that level of control. So all of this is fully customizable within CloudForms. While that's provisioning, I'm going to go ahead and flip over to the administrative view. So when we log in as administrators, we get access to the full breadth of options that CloudForms provides us. The screen I like to start with is the screen here. It's called our dashboard. So it's under our Cloud Intelligence section. And inside the dashboard, it's a way of us being able to basically put data on the screen in dashboard mode and using widgets when necessary for managing this environment. So from here, this is fully customizable. So I can go and move this information around as I want. I can just drag and drop things. If I want to get more information about my vendor and guest operating system chart, I can click this little dots here. If I go to full screen, it's going to show me all the information and the visualization. So it's going to show me the data that generated it, and it's going to show me the chart. So I could take this entire page and get a better understanding of the information. We can also export this out as a PDF. So if you want to be able to sort of present this to management or present this to your customers for different usage, all of this is manageable. We only have one dashboard here, but we can also set up multiple dashboards. And some simple scenarios for dashboard creation would be administrators needing to see different information than maybe your finance group needs to see, or maybe your managements want to see for compliance reasons, what operating systems and what percentage of the operating systems are being used in your environment versus your administrators who may or may not care about all of that information in total. So we just present you and we allow you to create all of these image based from saved reports. So to create these widgets and to get the information from those, we go into our reports section. So CloudForms comes with a massive set of reports already built in for you. I'm going to show you what a few of them look like. So the first thing, we have our saved reports. So a report is nothing but a series of data points, and then the saved reports is after we run it against our data, what those data points are. So I'm going to take a look at my saved report here, go to Amazon, my active VMs. If I click here, on this date at this time, these were my active VMs. And so this is just information that we have. If I wanted to be able to delete these, we can go and delete them out of the database, or I could go down into my report section, and this is where we have all these pre-canned reports. So let's start with a few just sort of conceptual reports to really get your hands around something when you're starting out using CloudForms. So easy things that we can show our customers, and as a customer you want to see. So for example, we go to our operations and then VMs. And in here, we can see all the VMs that are powered on. If I click on this, I don't have any infrastructure providers connected here, and I'll show you that in a minute, and I'll go through that and explain it. But if I have any VMs and instances, I could just come up to here, hit queue, and now I'm queuing that process to run. So this report's going to be in the process of generating. If I wanted to do that and set it for a schedule, I can create a schedule down in this next section and just assign that schedule to this report, and then we'll be able to run over a certain period of time. So maybe we want to run this scheduled run once a day, maybe once a week, get those kinds of things. We can see registered VMs organized by free disk space. So this helps us sort of get an idea of what we're looking at when we're talking about sprawl. If we want to find what VMs with an old version of VMware tools installed on them. So almost all of our customers from a Red Hat point of view use VMware. I mean, let's just be honest, they're pervasive. They're nearly everywhere. So if we want to see what versions are running old VMware tools, this is a tool. We can just go here, click Queue, and now we're running that job for them. And we're able to provide them actionable information that they'll be able to take and use to add value immediately. And these are just reports that come straight with CloudForms automatically. Some other things is when we're looking at sprawl candidates. So VMware sprawl, that's a constant thing I hear is that, hey, we're not sure, developers come in and request that we have certain resources and that they meet certain minimums. But in reality, we don't think that it's using all of that. So we have these reports here for VM sprawl. So VMs and volumes with greater than or equal to 75% of their disk space. So maybe if we look at this here and we find a bunch of VMs that have way more than 75% of their disk space free, we can shrink that down and we can add that back to the collective. And so that's how CloudForms itself can start immediately adding value and start paying for itself out of the box. We also have relationship mapping, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and we'll see that in kind of detail. But all of these just different reports, and each one of these go down into different things. So we can look at trending based on storage. So we can look at data center capacity or storage trends over 6 months, just so on and so forth. So everything but this Manage IQ section. All of these reports come pre-canned. And any of these saved reports you have, you can turn into a visualization using our dashboard widgets. Now, with that being said, we know sort of conceptually some of the ideas that we have. Now, what if I'm going to show you what it looks like to see all of the resources and what data points you can use to build your reports? And that's what we're going to go to next. So when we go into services and then workloads, this is what we say when we're talking about the single pane of glass across all your environments. So this is actually running out on a cloud provider. It's running out on AWS. And I have this connected to several cloud providers. So I keep using this term providers. Let me define that for you. So in CloudForms terms, a provider is either an infrastructure or a cloud provider. So the cloud providers we support, you can see most of them here, which are OpenStack, Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Google Compute. And infrastructure providers are VMware, Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, SVVM. Now, we also have vCloud as in tech preview for CloudForms as one of our management items. So if you have a customer who's had a lot of time struggling getting all of the reporting, getting vCloud Director built, getting the automation set up, we don't have to scrap that environment. We don't have to scrap what they have. In tech preview, which means that we'll have limited sort of best effort capability support, we can actually get that tied up. And we can actually get that connected into CloudForms itself. And that way we can utilize what they were doing in that other environment. And we can use the automation capabilities of that as well. So this is my single pane of glass across all my VMs and providers. I only have 14 VMs and instances on here, so to speak. So unfortunately, I'm not able to show you everything that I have. Let's see, why is my one VM process still going? Let me check something real quick. All right, that request was approved. Let's see if there's anything here. So we should be seeing should be getting a running VM soon out on AWS. It might just be taking a little bit to get provisioned. Here it is. Oh, no, yes, there it is. So for some reason, this is still in process of getting created. But what we've done is we've gone out and we created that WordPress application, and this is the system that it's running on. So in this view, we're able to see all the VMs we have, and I'm going to point out some information that we have that we present to you in the thumbnail format. So the first thing is, in the top right corner, we see the current status. So we can see that this VM is running, and we can see that this is running a RHEL system. So the top left is the operating system that it's running. So we can see this is stopped running RHEL. This is stopped running Windows. This is stopped running generic Linux. In the bottom left, we have the cloud provider or the infrastructure provider that it's running on. So this is the AWS symbol. This means it's running on Azure, and this means it's running on OpenStack. And then in the bottom right, it shows the number of snapshots we have for that particular system. So in this case, I don't utilize a lot of snapshots in this environment because it doesn't run 24/7. But if we had that, it's good information to have. So what we do is we can go and click into one of these infrastructure providers. I'm going to click into this system called Demo. I'm going to show you all the information that we have available to us. Now, I'm moving through this kind of quickly. If there's any questions before I dive into this, is there any questions around what it looks like from the user perspective to provision things? Is there any questions around reports? Okay, good. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the information inside of this VM. So we have our basic properties information. I can see the name of the VM. I can see the host name that it actually has on the system. I can see the local IP address. And since this is running out in a public cloud, I could see, if I had it running, the public cloud IP address. I can see what size this system is. And then I can see the operating system that it's running on. So this is a RHEL 7.2 system. Whenever I'm moving over anything and you see it highlight in blue, that means I can click into there and get more information. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. We can see lifecycle information. So when this was discovered by CloudForms, when it was last analyzed, if we set a retirement date. So retirement date is a way for us to be able to set a time for systems to shut down. So in that scenario before, we were talking about with the marketing department running a WordPress application. Well, what if that WordPress application was only supposed to run for 3 months? And at the end of that 3 months, it needed to be shut down and the resources reallocated. With retirement, we have the ability to set during provisioning time or any time thereafter this retirement date. And this says, hey, after this time period, it's going to shut down. And it could be 2 weeks, it could be months, we could set a date. It doesn't matter. And with that information, we don't need an administrator to go in on the day it's supposed to be shut down, look at his calendar, and manually shut the system down. Instead, we automate that action. We also have relationship information. So I'm looking here inside of my cloud provider. We can see if I clicked on my cloud provider, I can actually get more information about the specifics of that cloud provider. And so I can see what region it's in, what type it is. I can see its management engine GUID. I can see what flavors this Azure account has access to, what security groups have been created, and what instances are running on there. So it gives me a really good view of the information that I need to see in this environment. And if I want, I can actually see sort of the bubble view, which shows some of the topology and how it's connected. So I can see all the availability zones and how they're connected, the cloud tenants I have, and the tags that I have. I can also display the information, and I can see that this VM Azure test has this tag associated with it. So I'm going to go back to my VM and instance. And all of this is done is once it's connected to those providers. So there's nothing magical that we had to do to get that connected. It also collects CPU memory usage information. So we can see what is allocated and how much is actually being used. And we can take this data, and I'll show you in a minute how we can convert that into a chargeback report and how we can use that as part of a chargeback mechanism. We have our current compliance state, which I will talk about compliance state in a little bit. Just know that we can evaluate and set this key value pair for your compliance state. We have the current power state of that information. We can see what users and groups are on here. We can see what packages and what init processes are running. So packages, if you're not a Linux user, are basically applications that are installed on your Linux machine, and init processes are services that are running, and we can check the state of all of those. So I'm going to go ahead and hit packages just to give you a concept of the information that we can provide you once you are able to do a scan with this system. So we can see the package names, we can see the versions, and we can see the release numbers of that. And then if you're interested, it also has descriptions of what these packages are. So you can kind of help figure out what all of this means. So I'm going to go back into this demo system here. We have diagnosis information, which we're not really going to talk about here. And then we have smart management, which is a way that we're allowed to tag these systems. Now, tagging is, in my mind, probably one of the most interesting and most important things around CloudForms. It's one of the major value adds. We can tag anything, a resource, a group of resources, physical machines, VMs, automation tasks, users, groups, tenants, projects, anything you can imagine, we can tag in CloudForms. The value of this is that we can use those tags as a way of sorting through and sifting through the information when we're talking about reports, when we're talking about policy creation, when we're talking about chargeback. All of these capabilities are possible with using tags, and it makes things a lot easier with tags. So before I go forward, I want to stop here for a minute and see if there's any questions about anything we've talked about so far. Okay, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go back into our cloud intelligence section. I'm going to go back to chargeback. And so chargeback is just a specialized report that we can run. The way we charge is based upon two primitives. So this is very similar if you go out to AWS or Azure. It's very similar to their primitives. We charge based upon compute cost or storage cost. So the compute cost is based upon certain variables. And we'll take a look at, I have 3 chargeback reports. I'm going to click on my default container image rate. And so this is what I charge when I'm provisioning containers inside using CloudForms, or CloudForms is managing a platform for containers. Okay, with that being said, we have a few things and a few different ways we can charge. So we can charge based upon allocated or usage of CPUs. Now, this is pretty important. This is pretty cool. So I could say if I allocate 20 CPUs to a process, then I'm going to charge them $1 per hour per CPU. Or we could choose, we could choose to charge them, in this case, 2 cents per megahertz of US dollars per hour. And so it really gives us that flexibility. We can either set it to be sort of a static rate, or we can have it be how much they're actually consuming. So it's sort of an allocated versus a utility rate. We can also charge based on used cores, disk I/O. There's a fixed cost here, which I'll talk about in a minute, allocated and/or used memory, and finally used network I/O. So all of these things are cost to you when you're running a private cloud or a virtualization environment. So this way, it allows us to kind of set certain numbers and sort of gauge how much different users are using and the types of usage. Really, it's great for comparisons. So group A winds up using 65% of the resources. Well, maybe they should be paying more. Maybe they should be kind of contributing back to more. Now, this fixed section here refers to any other additional cost. So it's no measurable, but we can charge either by hour, or by day, or by week. I like to think of this as sort of two different ways. So we can either charge for cooling and electricity. If we have just sort of a monthly rate, we could set that there and they could charge it for that. Or we could actually have SLA. So if you have a service level agreement with your customers, you can use these fixed rates to set the price of your service level agreements, and you can modify it based on the type of systems they're using. So maybe if they're using VMware, you have a lower SLA rate than if they're using AWS, because you have more people you can allocate to a VMware problem than you could do an AWS problem. So it's all really about giving you actionable information to be able to sort of take action on that. And storage is very similar, although fewer options. Take a look at my Manage IQ chargeback rate. So you can charge based upon fixed rate or allocated storage rates. And then you can assign these using different methods. So we can assign them. I assign my chargeback compute rate to tagged VMs and instances. So earlier, when I was kind of pointing out one of those things, one of the customers I was pointing at was Coyote. So it's customer Coyote. They get charged my default rate, but if they're Roadrunner, they get charged my Manage IQ rate. And so those rates could be different, and that's how we can use tags in our system to sort of allocate what those look like and what chargeback rates get assigned to them. And customer A doesn't even need to know what customer B's chargeback rates are. Any questions about chargeback? All right, I'm going to show you that you can also change the options. So you don't need to use tags. You can actually just apply a single chargeback rate across the enterprise. In this case, all your data stores or tenants. And then for the compute capabilities, you can do the same thing. So you got the whole enterprise based on the infrastructure providers they're using. So if they're running on Azure, they're going to have a different chargeback rate than if they're running on Red Hat virtualization. Those kinds of things. Gives you all that flexibility. All right, next thing. We've taken a look at services. We've shown you what information you can get from your services. We've talked about how we can take that information and we can run reports against it. We can create reports using all those fields and information I showed you. What I'm going to go into now is I'm actually going to go into our control section. And so this is the final area where I would like to touch on today. And this really focuses on taking all the information that we've provided you and turning it into actions. So let me show you what one of those examples looks like. From this environment here, now these policies are all policies I've worked with, created, and or imported and exported over the past year working in CloudForms. So I've gotten some of these from other people I know. I've created some of these myself. We've worked on some of these and done some of this. So you don't get any of these reports out of the box, unfortunately. If you're interested in any of the reports I have here, I can point you to some GitHub resources on how to get some of these reports. So we have a way of sort of jump starting you to getting ready for these reports. I would just kind of be cautious using these ones in particular. Now, there are two types of policies. Let's start with showing you that first. So there's compliance policies, and that ties back to when we were looking at the VMs and instances, that compliance section I talked about. And then we have control policies. So under compliance and control, they're basically the same thing, except that compliance policies really are geared towards helping you get compliance of your systems. Control policies are more about controlling things when you have actions, or I'm sorry, it's more about controlling things when you have events and alerts coming at you. So each one looks similar. We have host controls, VM controls, replication controllers, pods, containers, and nodes and container images. Now I'm going to flick back up to some of the created policies I have, just so you can get a grasp on some of what these policies look like. So first, I'm going to show you a demo compliance policy. So under here, does everybody remember shell shock? So it was a vulnerability from about 2 years ago that had Bash be able to sort of jump outside of its capabilities. So if you were an unprivileged user, you could run some commands and you were able to jump up and become an administrator. It was a pretty bad thing. It was a vanity vulnerability. You know, it hit the news. CNN, MSNBC, those guys were kind of talking about this stuff. So in those types of cases, what we are able to do is we can create a policy that goes and looks at all the systems that we have and sort of filters out and gives us information and actions based upon that. So let's take a look what the shell shock vulnerability looks like. So first, I have a scope. This isn't required, but for this particular policy, I have a scope. So what it's doing is it's looking at the VM and instance name. So if the instance name has Linux in its OS name section, then it knows, hey, this is a Linux machine. So it's not going to evaluate the condition on any of my Windows machines my free BSD machines or anything else that I would have beyond that. It's just going to strictly look for Linux. Now we have a condition. So this is the vulnerability. What it's doing is going out and looking at those packages. You know, earlier I clicked into one of those packages and it said, hey, here's all the application names and all the packages installed on that box. Well, it's going through that and it's looking to see if the bash application is installed. And if it is, it's looking to see if the version is 4.1.2. And then if it is, then this compliance check will trigger this action. So it's going to trigger a VM compliance action, and actually 3 actions in this case. So what we're going to do is going to send an email to our security team saying, hey, this VM failed its compliance check. We should look at it. It's going to mark the system as non-compliant in our CloudForms user interface. So when we know, or if we want to run a report to look for all non-compliant machines, we can do that based upon that field, and we'll know that this system is non-compliant. And then it's going to generate a log file. And it might go to an external log, like sort of like Splunk or something like that, maybe to a log stash, an elk stack, where we can parse out those log files. But we are able to create these sort of business level actions that can occur to alert the right people when the conditions are met. So is there any questions around this policy? This is kind of a complex one, but I like talking about it because it shows a real valuable add for something that we can apply. Now, anything that we create in our reports or in our policy section, we can apply across all of our providers. So this is a VM and instance policy. So it doesn't matter if that VM or instance is running on AWS or VMware, we can take the same policy and apply it to either one of those. It's pretty cool. Any questions so far before I go in? And I'm going to show you another policy. If there's any policies here you're interested in seeing, please let me know, and then I can click in and expand it, and we can explain it as well. Now, something else I'm going to show you. So I'm going to show you a different type of policy where it's not really inspecting the VMs so much. Instead, it's going to go ahead and look at the VMs, but look at it from the infrastructure level. So in this policy, we have no scope, and that's okay. But it's going to look, and whenever this policy is applied to a system, if the system has more than 2 snapshots, it's going to delete the most recent snapshot. Now, this is kind of a weird policy, but I just want to show you that you can perform actions on your hypervisor using CloudForms as the mechanism for starting that. Now, what happens if you say, okay, I'm a clever system administrator. I've been using VMware for a long time, and I still have access to my VMware console. So CloudForms isn't going to let me take my snapshot. It's going to delete it. Now, it's not going to let me have more than 2. But what if I go into VMware? All right, so we go into VMware. We log into our console. We hit our snapshot button. What happens on this side is that whenever VMware or CloudForms does anything, whenever CloudForms or any of our providers perform any actions, there's bilateral communication. That means that CloudForms is made aware of any actions occurring on that provider. And that tells me that if we go into VMware console and we sign in, and we're not allowed to have more than 2 snapshots, we hit create snapshot, VMware is going to go tattle on you to CloudForms. It's going to run all its policy and compliance checks first. Once it's done and it passes, it's going to pass a response back to VMware to perform the action. In this case, it's going to be delete the most recent snapshot. So you are going to have to go back and delete one of your snapshots. Even if you bypass and you don't use the CloudForms interface, use your provider's interface, CloudForms is still in the loop. Once you have it connected to your providers, CloudForms becomes an integral part. Whenever CloudForms does something, it sends the API calls to your hypervisors to perform those actions. But whenever your hypervisor or your provider does anything, it lets CloudForms know it too. All right. So I've shown you some pre-canned policies. What I'd like to do is just show you some of the capabilities above and beyond CloudForms, the policy management engine. So I'm going to show you, we have our events. So look, whenever an event occurs, this is a condition for us to use, and then we can turn that into actions. So for example, there's a bunch of container actions that events that could occur. So a container node is ready. Well, maybe we want to perform a smart state analysis on it because it's ready. Or we have a data store fail. Well, maybe we want to alert our system administrators. Let's say we see a host system and we add a new host system to our cluster. Well, maybe we want to go and inform the system administrative team or the security team to make sure that it's met our security compliance checks. We also have additional information, so we can look under conditions, and then we can look at some other conditions. So if our log file size on a VM is less than 100 kilobytes, maybe we want to alert the owner of that system and send them an email telling them, hey, your logs are about to fill up. And then here's some of the actions. So here's the different events and conditions we can pull from, and we can create new conditions. But here's some of the canned actions that just sort of come in CloudForms. So we can retire a VM, we can send emails, we can power cycle the VM, we can mark a system as non-compliant, generate log files, delete snapshots. If your provider allows it, we can even increase or decrease the information. So if you have a VM that's running at 90% capacity on its CPU for a certain period of time, well, maybe we want that to trigger an event, and then we'll add a second CPU to that system to help it offload. And so there's a bunch of different actions, and then we have alerting capabilities. So alerts are usually bad things that occur. So here's an alert: VM guest up C drive reaches 100% or 10%, less than 10%. Sorry. It then goes and says, hey, you're going to fill up and this system's going to crash. So what we're going to do is we're going to send an email. So you just sort of create different policies as you go along, and you could create alerts and all of this information. So it's all about giving you actionable intelligence and then converting that into actual automated actions. Is there any questions about anything we've discussed so far? If there's no questions, I'm going to flip over to our topology view just so you guys can see some bubbles and see some information. So we have our different providers. We can see the VMs attached to them. We can show display names. All these things are movable and hideable. Turn them on, turn them off. There you go. All right, so I'm going to open this up to Q&A. Any questions so far?
So Matt, for some of these policies and stuff, are like, for example, for Shockwave, are they predefined? Like, is there a set of those that are set up by Red Hat for us that we can download to keep up to date?
There is not. Unfortunately, there isn't. It's becoming a common request, so I'm going to have to bubble that up to the BU. But there also might be sort of, there are people who are doing policies, but there's nobody who's kind of keeping an up-to-date status. So I use github.com/ramrex, 2 X's, and he has CloudForms Essentials, and this is where I largely got a lot of those policies from. So if we look here under his, another thing to note within CloudForms, a lot of this information is importable and exportable. So if we go back into CloudForms and we look at policies, controls, we can import and export those policies. So if you're interested in any of these policies that I have, I can just export them to a file for you. And then he has them inside of this section here. I think it's under policies. Yeah, it's under the controls right here. So scroll back up. There's controls. And he just has a policy. So it's all just a YAML file. You could write your own. Also, that could be some value adds for partners to be able to sort of create and customize certain specific policies that they have that they hear a lot of their customers are asking for. And they could export that. They could create it on their own CloudForms environment. And then when they go into a customer site, they could export them out and import it into the customer's environment.
So my next question, Matt, would be, in terms of this demo that we're looking at now, how different is that from the one you need our partners to learn to be able to demo after they've done a couple of these with you?
Primarily, it's going to be under the covers. It's going to be different. So instead of working out on cloud providers, you're going to be working probably with infrastructure providers. Not that much different. Building a service catalog is a little bit more complicated. So I wouldn't expect anybody to be able to do that without some guidance and some help from Red Hat. But yeah, I mean, pretty much everything here is I've tried to show you, with the exception of the policies and the service catalogs are out of the box with Red Hat. I mean, I customized a chargeback report, but that's fairly simple. It's just adding values to the tables.
And in terms of actual doing a POC out of this demo, if it actually goes to that, how would you, what would you expect the partners to be able to do over and above the basic reporting stuff that we've talked about?
We can kind of point towards that. I have out on GitHub. I do a lot of my work out on GitHub. A CloudForms POC. So this is github.com. mwordrh. So mword is my email. Red Hat CloudForms. I have the POC in a day section, and this is where we're sort of looking for partner feedback on what they think should be part of a POC. I have my opinion. If you look under the POC.md file, things I think they should be able to accomplish, but I'm going to expand this out to kind of be a little bit more prescriptive, a little bit more of a guide. But I would love to hear from partners what they think. Currently, to get to the state that I have now in my environment would take me to rebuild maybe 3 or 4 hours, and that's including the installation of CloudForms itself, installing a local database, getting it all connected, getting all the information in there.
Hey, Matthew, this is Dave Fox with CBTS. This is my first exposure to CloudForms, so I have a couple of very elementary questions.
Yeah.
This was a management engine, and regardless of whether, I could see this being in play in an enterprise type of environment or a large customer environment, separate from any type of cloud-based services. Is that a fair assumption, or am I misunderstanding?
No, it absolutely can. So It's designed to be either on-prem or in the cloud and not matter whatsoever.
Okay, and then my second question is, as far as the integration, where the magic of this product is really coming from is in conjunction with VMware. Is that correct? Is that where the integration and the information exchange between what's happening in the enterprise and what's happening here at the management engine, is that where it's taking place, at the VMware integration level?
So what I'm going to do is, the answer is yes, with a slight caveat. So it's happening at the provider level. So this is sort of CloudForms terminology. So it happens, all of the information that's being collected is collected from the provider, whether that provider is AWS, Azure, VMware, OpenStack, Rev, any of the ones I've mentioned multiple times. Though in
an enterprise environment, who is the provider?
Almost always VMware, but Rev and OpenStack are also infrastructure providers. So they're also supported in CloudForms, but it connects to any of those providers they have. So it doesn't matter if it's on-prem or off. But the mechanism's the same. The providers that are actually doing the provisioning of the resources collect all that information as part of that. So, for example, your example of VMware is right on. So VMware in vCenter collects all of that information from its hypervisors. Then it bubbles it up through an API layer to CloudForms. And so what we're doing is when we're adding a provider, we're just connecting that bilateral API communication.
You're providing a level of automation and analysis in conjunction
and abstraction
in working with the, as you're terming it, providers.
Exactly. So when we go to provision a service catalog, what is happening is that in a very simple service catalog, we're basically passing all of the variables required for that VMware on-prem instance to start a VM and provide information back to us.
My last question is, from a competitive landscape, who are the other players in this market right now?
So there are a couple other players, and we have kind of integration into them. So ServiceNow is probably the biggest competitor in this space, but they are doing it a totally different way. And we actually have an integration point with ServiceNow, where ServiceNow it manages assets, it manages business processes, it manages a whole bunch of stuff. But it doesn't collect all the information the same way we do. It doesn't do as reporting the same way we do. It doesn't allow you to do sort of certain pieces just are missing inside of ServiceNow that are sort of the key things I was pointing out in CloudForms, the policy management engine, those types of things. Yeah. So what we can do is we can basically either have you provision a resource out of your ServiceNow portal and have CloudForms provision it, configure it, and get it running, and then tell ServiceNow, hey, we're done, add it to your asset management. Or we can go the other direction and we can have CloudForms, you can order it from CloudForms. It'll send a call out to ServiceNow saying, hey, go through your approval process. When the approvals are done, send me back a thing saying, okay, we're ready. And then it will provision it and continue on in the process. So there's a couple integration points. There's a good blog post that came out a couple weeks ago about that.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's the biggest competitor in this space. Everybody else is kind of just doing sort of one thing. So if you're in one ecosystem, so if you're in only AWS or you're only in Azure, they collect all that information and they provide it to you in similar ways that CloudForms does, except they don't care about your on-prem stuff.
Right. It's limited to their offering.
Same thing with VMware. VMware collects all his data, but they don't collect any data about a lot of the cloud providers. Or if they do, if you buy the advanced products, it's only AWS and it's only limited information from AWS. So this gives you sort of all of those options. And the value inside of CloudForms is once we're able to provision resources, we can just kind of point the automation wherever we want this to be. And you're provisioning resources in a new environment that makes sense for you. So if you wind up cutting a deal with Azure because they're giving away free Azure credits like candy, and you have a ton of resources on-prem and some stuff out on AWS, well, now maybe you can say, let's utilize some of these free workloads and put it on AWS, on Azure. Well, you've done a lot of the work. This is where it kind of pays off.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for joining. If you have any questions, please reach out to Mark, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Thank you very much, Matt.